Good morning, Kieran.
Good afternoon, Francis. I think
Tis,
you meant. You have to
tis
remember
true.
we're geographically disparate places. Some of
Crossing
us living in some
international
more disparate
boundaries.
places than others.
Hey, I'm going to try harder not to interrupt today. It's very difficult for me. My brain is so wired. I even interrupt my wife and she slaps me a few times, you know.
Yeah, but when you say your brain's so wired, is it connected to your mouth? Let's just work with that one. Is that what she's hinting at?
Not all the time. That
Right.
is the
Right.
problem.
That would explain a lot.
There's little blips, yes.
Yeah.
And on that note, we got Mr. Phil Fersht on, our first guest on our podcast.
There you go.
Phil, good morning.
Good morning.
How are you?
Not too bad.
Phil, so when we so appreciate you joining us and being our inaugural guest, you know, this is an honor, I think. Kieran, you would agree?
Oh, definitely. Anyone willing to turn up needs an award. So yes.
And
yes,
be first and be the guinea pig in all of this. We did our first podcast. It was just Kieran and I, and of course it's not really that interesting, just the two of us. We need a guest to sort of like, you know, in this digital fight club podcast, we need a guest, and what better guest than yourself? And so I'd thrown as a part of the invite, I was throwing some ideas over to you. And so one of the ideas I came up with that you didn't seem to disagree with is we're going to try and see if maybe for this one we pick a word that seemed to be either controversial or current, and use that as a discussion point, which could mean we could go in any direction and go back to talk about football again. But the word we came up with was automation, right? And my interpretation of this word automation, which of course is at the heart of all you do at HFS and what you've been doing for many years, like myself, is how can it possibly be used in a singular word now to explain anything when in fact it explains everything from the ability to boil water to the ability to automate sending men to Mars. I mean, you know, it's and you know, and then they throw the word intelligent automation on the front of it, or you know, and then of course you got really bad automation, and then you got super sweet automation. So with that, is this a good word for us to play on for this podcast?
Absolutely, yes.
Did we have a set of rules though? And Phil, this is for every member of the audience out there. Were Francis to mention his current employer, and there's no suggesting he's going to a different employer in that statement, by the way, just out loud, he has to give $5 to charity every time. That's probably not enough. Whereas if we made it 500, we might end up with about 500,000 by the end of this show.
I did mention it once last time. Come on. That's a bit.
I'd have to go back through the recording, but then I'd have to listen to what we said, and that's probably not the best idea she said earlier.
I think I'm one of the best for not. I love the company I'm at that shall remain nameless, but at the same time, there is a massive amount of innovation going on in all sorts of different industries and technologies. It's great to be competitive, which is why we come up with the Digital Fight Club, so we could start to get to the truth. So, Phil, some elements of truth on this term automation. Give us some insights.
Yeah, it's, you know, I think, you know, it's been a very long 10 years since we sort of opened up the RPA conversation to the industry. I mean, the term was created 10 years ago. We were obviously very involved in it. And the whole excitement was around the fact that we'd found some software that non-IT people could use to try and patch up broken processes, documents, systems, all sorts of bits and pieces. And there was a hell of a lot of fuss around the fact that you could sell technology to a CFO or a CPO and have them fix their processes with it. And I don't feel it's really come of age until the last couple of years where we were in a pandemic. There was a desperate need to just get some systems working, and the whole attitude shift from let's stop trying to find some little things in the back office that aren't that important, to be honest, but can save some money if you do it well, or maybe you can remove some headcount, and let's actually use automation for things that matter, that impact the business. And then, you know, there were so many examples of companies where, like, I think the student loan system got saved because of automation. You know, one of my clients has a massive pet care business, and during COVID, there was a huge demand in people to call the pet care hotline and get their dogs and cats sorted out, and there was a massive shortage of agents. So they set up a very clever automated system using chatbots and other pieces of technology. And you know, we've started to see, you know, this attitude around how can you use automation to really improve your business and help you do things more effectively. So I think this has been a big shift in looking at automation from this back office, save a bit of money, speed up a few cycles attitude to actually, this is the critical attitude and glue that's going to propel businesses into the modern digital age. It really is. And it's a very different mindset I'm seeing from many businesses to automation now than even 3 or 4 years ago.
So I'm gonna challenge, because I want to challenge around this word automation. So let's get into this fight, right? Because you used the word automation there. I didn't count, but let's just say 12 times, because I can make it up unless anybody's bothered to rewind and go back and listen, right? But isn't everything we were doing when we had the first computerization of manual work, isn't everything automation? And Excel spreadsheets automation, you know, spell checkers automation. So when we use the word today, automation, it's used so loosely that even I'm confused when I say, oh, you know, we're going to automate this. Are we automating something that was already computerized? Are we automating something that should have been computerized? Or are we automating some things that were not automated properly the first time around? And so that's the dichotomy I've got. And then, of course, we know the analysts. You've got one office, we've got hyper automation, intelligent automation, digital process automation, and God knows what else. But if I was a buyer, I'd be sitting there going, Charlie Brown, Charlie Brown, Charlie Brown, please tell me what you mean by the word automation. So how do you get through that, Chaff?
That's a very good point. So if you're starting something fairly new, you don't think automation. So, you know, we're going to upgrade our accounting system from blah to blah. In reality, you are automating a hell of a lot your finance department overnight, but you don't think of it as automating because you're investing in software and you're investing in a solution. A lot of automation now is retrofitting technology and thinking and ideas and process design into existing processes that aren't working very well or could work a lot better. So I think our use of automation is much more around fixing existing stuff than moving into completely new environments where everything is already automated and you don't even think about it.
Surprised we didn't have the magic quadrant for Excel sheets, because I'm sort of in the same place. Do you know what I mean? It's I hate the word automation. It sounds slightly odd because I use it all the time as well. But 20, 30 years ago, we had, you know, online websites, online forums, online booking. You know, I worked in a law firm was doing all that in the year 2000 or 1990 something. And I wonder whether it's the marketability of the word itself, because it all sounds very sexy now, whereas I can't remember too many sexy IT words in the past. And
my real point here is that digital native companies, as Phil really alluded to, they don't go out and buy RPA. They don't go out and buy process mining. They don't go out and buy automation. They become digital natives from the ground up, right? And in theory, if everything's got, you know, inbuilt APIs, it's got inbuilt integration, inbuilt analytics, inbuilt AI, then maybe they never get automated in the sense of the word that we've used it about automating existing legacy processes. And in fact, I even hope that the future of software is there is no legacy. It's just continuously evolving.
What would you consider Spotify or HubSpot's digital natives? Spotify, big RPA team. HubSpot, big Workato team.
Yeah, but that comes back down to they rushed their products out the door, potentially. The technology that was around. I mean, you know, even Amazon has got a lot of legacy. Google's got a lot of legacy. But we are reaching this point, I believe, where software has advanced so much. And maybe it's just Francis dreaming, but the future state will be that you don't need to automate in the sense that we use automate as is processes. And let's be honest, RPA, well-defined, it's UI automation. It automates a UI. If your UI isn't consumed and created by the consumption inheritance of the processes that are now digitized, and that you need to scrape data off of that screen, God help me. I've been doing that since the 80s.
I'll be the first. This will be the first of any that I will openly admit that I've fallen back in love with automation, having fallen out of love with it for a while. And a lot of that was because of the obsession with RPA. And what's happened is I've seen many more CIOs and CTOs getting involved in automating bits and pieces of their organizations, and they love it because, one, they're better at getting things done. They know how to run complex projects, and they know how to sign things off, get them delivered, and comply with security, privacy, scalability. And that's the big shift. Before, the CIO got involved and they were like, what the hell is all this software, blah, blah, blah. It was really hard because if you don't have IT on board, any initiative, it's never going to scale within the business, and you end up, if you leave operations to run things, you end up with a political quagmire. You can't get anything signed off, and I think the involvement of the IT community and automation has changed the game completely, because they like finding things that they can do that's effective. They can work with their process counterparts to say, well, what do we need fixing here? Most of the automations we're seeing now involve some sort of application integration. So it could be, I was just working with a company who's doing a big SOX compliance automation, and that was run on a Pega system, for example. So they brought in some help from, I think it was PwC.
I've heard of that company, yeah.
Yeah,
PwC, yeah, they're very well known, really well known.
Yeah, to fix that for them. But then what happens is the company itself, the IT guys are much better at bringing in a consultant and getting a consultant to train them on how to do it, and then they kick the consultant out because they're so bloody expensive. And this is what happens. So you talk to the big four, all their automation businesses are one-off projects because the clients don't want to pay the fees, and they want to bring them in to teach them how to do it. And then they go, okay, now we're going to fix this thing over here in the back office, and we hear KPMG is really good with this particular platform. We'll bring them in to help next, and then they'll bring in Deloitte for UiPath and whatever they're using. So it's just become much more, let's fix stuff. Let's look at the whole gamut of integration and automation technologies together. Bit of RPA, workflow tools, what integrates with what. IT people love their Pegas or their ServiceNows or their Azures, so they want to get, how does this all fit together more effectively? And it's becoming a broader automation transformation conversation, where it's, retrofitting technology to make stuff work a lot better that wasn't working so well in the past, and that's really what it is. But where we're seeing real momentum in automation is when companies start to really figure this out, and then they almost start looking for it. So you get this culture of automation within the business, and then the CIO will start talking with his or her counterparts in other functions and departments to say, right, what can we do next? What can we do next? So they get this confidence, and it's an attitude, it's a mentality. It's not a strategy. Our strategy is to just do automation. It's not. It's a tactical. I hate the term native, but it really is a native, attitude to let's start fixing stuff, and this is how we do it.
Well, so those are the two definitions that I struggle with, right? So the word fixing is a kind of, again, you can apply fixing by, we're going to fire everybody, rebuild everything from scratch, right? That's not going to happen. That's not fixing. And the word automation there, very loosely, is like, okay, so let's call it what it is. RPA, UI automation. It automates someone else's user interface. That was built for a purpose because there's no other way to integrate it. RPA would not be used, a UI automation element of RPA would not be used if there was another way, right? It's just that's a fact. I don't think we can. So that term of robotic process automation is because it's automating. And then you can extend that. So that's why I see that tactical automation as a step. If you have no other way to automate, but you need a digital process at the front end, you borrow UI automation, hence RPA. You build it, you get it working. You realize you got to manage it, you got to look after it. It's like like baking a cake. It's like 30 seconds too long and it's dead, right? And so then you've got to also plan really why you needed that RPA and how you can get rid of that RPA. And so I wrote a little bit about the RPA, great RPA resignation recently. But I'm seriously thinking about if you're going to automate and it's tactical and you're going to automate and it's digital transformation, I think we as an industry have got to make it clearer, because every vendor seems to be jumping on the latest buzzword and implying that they're automating every single possible way from digital transformation to tactical scraping.
But are we not narrowing the conversation ourselves, Francis? Because every time we mention automation, we head straight to RPA. But if you look at iPaaS, that's a version of automation. So we've just linked SaaS-based systems together. Like, horribly speaking, Excel VBA automation, you have 1,001 different glues.
Agreed.
That,
you have the same element there, though, Kieran. So if you think about why do people say we use RPA, is because in building APIs is actually very hard.
Yep.
And one of the reasons it's hard is because when you build a process, so when we computerized the process over the last 40 years, we build the same rule in the database layer so we can extract it and update it. We build the same rule in the application layer and the UI layer so we could validate layer. So every layer contains the business rules. So you can't change one without having to re-engineer the rest. And so that's why APIs are so hard to build. But the new era of software should be you get an API for free. Now, you're absolutely right. iPaaS is great, but you've got to still build the API. Now you're building the API on top of a legacy system that maybe isn't built for today's or the future world, the future state. It could be. You borrowed an API, you built and borrowed it. So it's really like RPA, quick fix, API, perfect-ish, as long as the processes underneath are conforming to the future state. Otherwise, when you need the next API, there you go again. You go off for 6 months and you go off and build it. It's just that fragile way of band-aiding everything until you get to the ability to build more Nirvana-like software.
Yeah, let me disagree momentarily, just otherwise we wouldn't be fighting. So I can't name a particular piece of software, just otherwise welcome to the world of security companies. But take some of the big things that we mentioned, some of the big SaaS platforms out there. You wouldn't describe them as legacy products. They're not. They're there. I brought in a trainee. They are there in the organization 6 weeks. Put them through a couple of day training course and gave them a bit of support, and they're already connecting systems together because the API tooling of the iPaaS platforms are point and click, already saving value. So there we've got automation, APIs, someone trained in 6 weeks, and are connecting together some of the biggest SaaS platforms that you can imagine on the planet. We'll all know their names. Same difference, job done.
But they haven't stood still. The reason you can do that, they haven't stood still. 30 years ago, you wouldn't have been able to do that. But they themselves have been architecturally updated to enable you to do that.
They have, but then that contradicts your argument a moment ago that APIs and all sorts of platforms are legacy. That's why we do it. We're just.
Oh no, I didn't mean to imply all. I do believe there's a future.
That's us moving forward in the real world, because we need the features and functionalities and the connectivity between SaaS-based platforms. Not legacy. RPA.
My argument is the word automation is thrown out there as if you have that state. It's thrown out there as if, you're whatever business you are, whether you're a 50-year-old business or a 1-year-old business, you just go and automate without contemplating. And it's so easy to do this with RPA, but the truth is, if it's more legacy it is, the harder it is. The more digital it is, the less you need it. And there's somewhere in between. Phil? Help the fight here.
And maybe I've been through a renaissance myself. I just don't think RPA is as relevant as it was, to be honest. It's got a role to play. It can fix, as you said, Frances, it's good at fixing old stuff, but not necessarily useful with digitally native systems. The real value now is the conglomeration of tech you can use. The discovery technology, process mining is now the #1 hot area in automation, where companies are going a bit crazy investing in what can we mine and find and discover. And then how do you start to really build AI edges around the applications as well? I'm even seeing some really ambitious companies, particularly in spaces like retail and CPG, starting to look at things like geospacing tech, which has big ramifications for metaverse in the longer term. How do you actually take visualizations into 3D and into virtual reality and things like that? So I think we're seeing a much closer connection between process, tech, data, and AI than ever before. I think the RPA conversation is so relevant. I mean, you saw that Magic Quadrant came out last week in RPA. I'm just like, all I can think of is, why do Gartner even bother to do this? It's like, who cares? It's like it's the same 6 companies, same positions, same thing every year for the last 5-6 years now. Come on, let's change the and everyone does their little press release. We were in I'm like, who cares? It's not important.
You were first with RPA. What was interesting is, I think I wrote this 2006. We won a Gartner Magic Quadrant award. This was my founding company, And they said a cool vendor. That's it, Gartner Cool Vendor Award. They said, but we're never covering screen. This is it, Francis. We're never covering screen scraping again. And then, of course, here we are in 2022, and it is screen scraping in all but a different name that you came up with your friends over at Blue Prism, I believe.
Yeah, and it's just not at this point. You know, every customer in this space, and they will. A lot of them will not. 70% of enterprise automation leaders actually admit that they're still novices, which I think is a good thing.
Yeah.
They all realize they're still at the beginning of this journey. But the one thing they all understand is they know who the RPA firms are and what they do, and they've had their look at the products. That's not really important anymore. It's much more, how do you get a real culture within your organization to take a much more strategic view of what do we need to be successful, what data do we need, how do we operate more effectively. We're under all sorts of pressure from our C-suite to digitally modernize and move into the virtual era, especially COVID really drove that. And you know, automation, I think it's a fine word because it means we're getting this stuff working better. And
but combined with what you just said, I absolutely violent agreement with you. You talked about, you know, the future state and, you know, the word automation then. And as long as you are thinking strategically, it's okay to do tactical. If you're thinking tactically, and the problem with automation, sometimes it fools people into thinking they're doing strategic if they don't know what those other pieces are. So I agree with that. That's a good part of the process.
I mean, there's some very dramatic things happening in the workplace, which I think have a ramification on a lot of automation investments. So my brother-in-law, for example, runs a call center. He'll never watch this webcast, so don't worry, I'll get him in trouble. But you know, he runs a call center, and you know, they can't get people in a day, a month now into the call center. But if you think about
working or not wanting to work in a call center,
no, they can't get them into the office. They want to just sit at home and do their. But the beautiful thing about a call center is you're just sitting at home doing a rules-based process on an intranet, basically answering customer queries and putting it through. And you don't need to do a hell of a lot of training. It's very automatable, and all these people refusing to come to the office. You think about the cost of that business. Over time, you've got 500 people working at home all over whatever region you've got. And if you think about, we could literally automate those people away very, very quickly and remove them from the business. That's a massive cost saving. And so I think in processes like that, where traditionally businesses have kept investing in people, retaining particularly low income workers these days is extremely hard. It's a huge headache for businesses to hire new people, train new people, develop them in this market. And I don't see this changing for a long time. I think if you talk about recessions and things, it's going to hit more the middle class, the middle level, than the lower income level. And I think the lack of low income availability is going to drive this need to automate, particularly in things like customer service, supply chain, these areas where you just can't get the people anymore.
So what's different this time around? So automation, computerization, same thing, really. I remember probably I came into the workforce when I was 17, 18, so it's many years ago now. And we were talking then about a 3-day week because computerization was going to do it. So what's different this time around, 40 years plus on, Phil, do you think?
Because we're down to the different... So if you ever get some time, I read Microsoft do this annual work trends survey of their own workforce. They did 31,000 workers in Microsoft. If you can get past all the marketing for we all need to use Teams all the time, it was very interesting that 52% of Gen Zs, these are basically people under 30, 52% of them don't want to go into the office anymore, right? Completely work remotely. This is the young generation who 3-4 years ago would only go into the office and we had to invest in fancy coffee bars and kegs of beer and things to keep them amused, right? They want to go in. And then of that, I think a similar amount want to move even further remotely away where it's cheaper to live. So how do you train that younger generation? You know, how do you, you know, you've got people aged 25 years old who've never been into an office, just want to work from home. That's an entire generation of, wow. Like, think about it. It's a very, very different scenario from even 3 or 4 years ago, where you could bring them in, train them up, have a career path and all this sort of stuff. The whole fundamental concept of workers, particularly for the cadetship model, the early phase younger people, is completely blown up in front of us. And what are we going to do? Wait for the next generation to come along?
We always sound like our parents. I remember my parents say, "You've never had it so good." I say to my children, "You've never had it so good," and I think their children's children, "You never had it so good." So the truth this time around, do we think that this is such a paradigm shift that people want to work from home? I mean, I love going into the office. I miss that so much, and here's me in my home. But does that have a knock-on effect then to what's really going to happen this time around with automation?
Oh, I think so, because it's now becoming extremely more expensive. You can't really train a lot of these people. You're having to then focus your hiring on a lot more experienced people because the choice is not out there. And I think these changing workforce dynamics are driving the need to look. The more we can computerize systems, the more we can automate systems, the more we can automate customer service and things. I wrote a blog about this recently, which is where do you need human contact now? It's only when interactions are meaningful. If they're not meaningful, when you go into a bank, who needs to talk to the bank tellers anymore? No one. You'll do it yourself. When you go and organize a flight for yourself with the airline, why call up the airline? Because they're just going to be looking at the same system that you are looking at. So just get me a good app and automate it well, and I'm very happy. And then we can go on and on and on with this. It's like, and then do you need to talk to your colleagues? We just chat on Zoom all day. I don't actually need to see them anymore, and talk to them. And then, you can go through every element of your life and think about how much human interactions you generally need.
Well, the Gen Z, as you said, the Gen Z perhaps don't want that human interaction. Although I do think that one was coming up fast. If we was to put these things in a race, that the very idea that this, and you hit something on the edge, which I think really hits home for digital automation. Let's just call it, or strategic automation, which is if the employees are using the same systems that you as the customer is using to access to do what it is you want done, whether that's to wire money, book a flight, a hotel, cancel something, whatever. The very fact that they're logging into those same systems tells me that you as an enterprise are well on your way to that digital transformation nirvana where you need to be.
Phil, what do you think then? Just what's not the anecdote for firms, but do we just accept this and say, okay, on we go, automate and be damned, or what are the best doing?
Dealing with people is harder than ever. There's a huge amount of burnout in the workplace. A lot of that's driven by this work at home thing. So every company is feeling their way through, how do we keep the wheels on? How do we keep getting people energized? Everyone loves to talk about mental health. Yes, an employer does have to help with their staff's mental health, but also I think people need to take responsibility for their own mental health as well. We had a big culture call last week, and I got everybody to give us one example on what they do during the day to take a break or to improve their spirits and things like that. It's there is no written rule for what's happening right now, and it's a hard solution for many businesses to follow. And when your operations are starting to slip because staff aren't turning up for work or they're just not working as hard as they used to be, one, you've got to make sure your managers are better trained to manage this. Two, there are massive HR issues going on as well. Like in certain countries, if you just mention the mental health word, you're unfireable, for example. Think about it. And there's some huge issues going on in society that are impacting the workplace. And ultimately, as a business, you need to look at your survival and think, what are my labor costs? What do I need to keep moving forward? What type of workforce do I need to have in the future? And what's my best way of managing that? One is outsource, to say, right, so why are we bothering to run our own customer service and have to deal with all this people stuff now? It's really, really difficult. So I'm going to outsource and get somebody else to take care of that. The problem is once you've outsourced it, it's very hard to then automate it and do anything different, right? The other thing is to do more on yourself. I think, how can we introduce automation to relieve workload stress on people make things work more smoothly, work easier, free people up to do more interesting activities. So one of the things I have heard a lot about recently is that these automation exercises are freeing up individuals to do more interesting work. And if they can't find more interesting work to do, then they should probably
because they're involved
anyway.
because they're involved in, it's a good way to wrap that, because they're actually involved in building automations, the very automations of the work they're doing. Is that the point you were making, Phil?
Yeah. And it's like, if you can make your own work more automated, you can find better things to do. And I think people are finding it easier to find more valuable things to do for their companies. They really are. People are much more into data, much more into better communication with other staff. I think the whole work at home thing is making work interesting in that you can find more useful things to do for your companies and things. In the old days where you might be in finance or procurement and your job really was to just do transactional activities all day, those days are, we're leaving those behind, and individuals are less scared. That's the one big positive coming out of this whole labor revolution, is people are less scared of losing their jobs. People are much more open to change, because we've been through very scary change in the last 2-3 years, and people will learn new technology if it's worth their while doing. They will learn how to manage data platforms if it's a data platform that they want to invest their time and their efforts into, that's going to improve their careers. People on the whole know what they've got to do to be successful. If they don't, and they might be at that age where, I know a lot of people in their late 50s, early 60s who are just retiring because they've looked at the world and said, this world ain't for me. I know a lot of people have done that. They just said, this is a different era now. I'm going to quietly take myself out and retire. Other people are realizing, I have to change how I work. I need to change the people I work with. I need to learn how to use data and manage data more effectively in my job, and they're doing that. So, this is the biggest revolution we've seen, I think, in the history of work, probably since the 19th century. So.
Well, it is my talk track. I call it the digital revolution because I think it is. I think that we've never been here before with, unlimited compute power, elasticity, and storage, and the ability to shift through that data is just, it is. But at the same time, what I didn't see coming was this whole. I use the term now Gen Z loosely because it it really is. The generation, multiple faceted generations that are involved in this discussion, everything from retirees to the Gen Zs. And what's the current one? What is it? The new people, is that like, I don't even know what the current gen is. But it is, and automation is going to be at the heart of everything we do. And it's definitely interesting. I hope our guests found, our audience find that interesting. And listen, Phil, been brilliant, right, Kieran?
Yes, fantastic. Thank you so much indeed.
Cheers. Thanks, Kieran. Thanks, Francis.
That's a wrap. So listen, we're going to see you next time. We're going to set this up for the next guest. He's got a lot to follow now. We appreciate if you've got any ideas for the topic for our next guest, please post them in the chat when we post this podcast, wherever we post this podcast. And thanks again, Phil. It's been brilliant.
Yeah, cheers. Thanks, guys.